Hi. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Sarandon, and welcome to Cooking by Heart. And this is where we revisit the vivid memories of the food we grew up with.
I couldn't believe the tastes and the flavors.
Lydia Bastianich. Hi, Chris. Susan Sarandon.
And, of course, more importantly, the people and the stories attached to that time in our lives.
You know, I've been dying to chop this up with you for a while now.
Yeah.
And I would do Julia Child.
This is a lovely chocolate macadamia nut truffle that has dark chocolate. You can get it in milk chocolate too. I prefer the dark.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alice Waters.
I was the one, sort of like mommy dearest.
He'd order one side of the menu and eat that. And then when he was finished eating that, he'd order the other side of the menu and eat all of that. Emptied the kitchen.
Food is the thing. Come on. We got that.
Campaign. I'd like to welcome everybody who's listening to the podcast, who's watching it on YouTube, and of course, this rowdy crowd here at the Sacred Heart University Community Theater in beautiful downtown Fairfield, Connecticut. It's okay. You can give Fairfield a little applause too. This podcast is supported by WSHU Public Radio, where we feed your curiosity with a blend of classical music, in-depth news, and stories that spark new ideas. Download the WSHU app or listen live at wshu.org and explore something new today. And as a reminder, as Matt just mentioned, that for you foodies out there, on Saturday, April 12th, we'll be back here at the Shoe with Emmy, Peabody, and Humanitas Award winner John Marcus, former showrunner for The Cosby Show and Larry Shandeling Show, who will be discussing his return to television with his cable hit, Barbecue Pitmasters. My guest tonight is Griffin Dunne. Who has been an actor, producer, and director since the late 70s, and lately has added best-selling and critically acclaimed author to his resume. Dunne produced and starred in the now iconic movie After Hours, directed by Martin Scorsese. And by the way, if you haven't seen this movie in a while, this is an extraordinary performance that he gets, and it's a great movie too. And also starred in John Landis's movie American Werewolf in London, among many, many other films. His television appearances have included Frasier, Law and Order, SVU, Succession, The Good Wife, Only Murders in the Building, and This Is Us, again, among many, many others. He directed the cult classic film Practical Magic, and, we got some Practical Magic fans here, and the documentary The Center Will Not Hold about his aunt, Joan Didion. And his raw and heartfelt book, The Friday Afternoon Club, is, despite glamorous backdrops of New York and Hollywood, a portrayal of a family and their secrets who become, through his writing, universally relatable. And then for those of you who are unaware, there are copies of the book that will be available for purchase and for Griffin to sign after the podcast. What more can I say? Ladies and gentlemen, Griffin Dunne. All right. Here we are between two fake ferns.
Yes.
And I usually start the podcast with the question of provenance, where we're from, because it means so much in terms of the food we eat and how we consume it. Where?
My mother is half Mexican.
Right.
And so she, is that me? Come on.
Are you beeping?
Yeah, it's my
it's your
alarm.
phone.
It's saying, now's the time I'm supposed to do the show.
Well, you better get going.
Thank you for that. So this all ties into the food thing.
Yeah.
So my mother was, raised in a border town in Nogales, Mexico, Arizona. And my father's side is Irish. They came over during the famine on that side of the family. So we were brought up, I was born in New York. And then when I was 3 or 4, my father moved us to Hollywood. And we lived in Santa Monica, and then we lived in Beverly Hills. And he was in the film business and television, actually. They were very social, my parents. So they would go out most nights, and then one night a week we would eat in a restaurant, either the Brown Derby, which made like butterfly steak, but they're all fancy restaurants. Or,
Right. Famous restaurants.
But famous
The
restaurants.
ubiquitous watering holes of Hollywood.
We would go to those. The Brown Derby and La Scala, and then
Cason's.
Chasen's. Those would be the meals with our parents.
Right.
The rest of the time, we were raised by a housekeeper who, also from Mexico, who cooked rice and beans. And that's basically what I'm made of. It's in my blood.
Now there's an interesting, and I have read the book, obviously, and there's an interesting sort of line in the family that goes back to the 1800s, yes?
Yeah.
And transportation, how?
On my mother's side again, her father married my grandmother, who was Mexican, but he was a rancher who had left the family fortune from Chicago. It was his great grandfather founded the Griffin Wheel Company, and the wheels were on every train, every Pullman car in America.
Jeez.
So it was a real dynasty.
Yeah.
But my grandfather was a bit rebellious, and all he wanted to be was a rancher. He didn't want to have anything to do with that. And so he left, and he had emphysema. And as a kid, he went to this, like a camp for sick kids in Arizona, and he always remembered it. So he went back to that area and bought some land and met my grandmother.
Now, you would go there, right?
Yeah, we go there every year. I grew up there.
Wonderful story in the book about your crossing the border with a bunch of kids. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Nogales was, at that time, a very quaint border town and kind of a great place to grow up in, because you could cross the border at any age, no ID. It would just be like going through a turnstile and you walk into Mexico.
Times have changed.
Times have changed. And, you walk around, and of course, as a teenager, they would serve you alcohol if you were 8 years old. And so we would go back and forth between the borders. And my mother was an aficionado of mariachi songs. Mm-hmm. And when she saw a mariachi band, we'd always go to the same restaurant called La Roca, and the mariachi band would be there, and she'd always play Stump the Band, and she would just say, "Do you know that song?" And she'd say it in Spanish, and they just fell in love with her. And I remember one night, we were all kids, like I was about 8, and my brother was 6, and my sister was, maybe 4, and it was really late, so it was time to go across the border back to Arizona. And so my mom said to the band, "I'm sorry, we got to go. It's, my daughter's really sleepy." And they go, "No, we're coming with you." And the mariachi band follows us across. They pick their, Gutierrez over the thing. And they just played all night long in the house. And I remember waking up, and there'd be all these mariachis on the floor with the sombreros like this. We'd step around them.
Do you remember the food in the restaurant?
Yes, it was fairly a lot of shrimp, a lot of enchiladas, right? Kind of normal stuff. But it was a fancy restaurant, somewhat. But it had
for the time and the place.
Pretty normal sort of fare. The dish that we basically also grew up on. My mother eventually she became ill and went back to Nogales from Los Angeles. Went back to Nogales to spend her remaining years. Whenever I would go to visit, there would be a bowl of pozole, which is a Mexican soup, which is so good. And it would just sit on top of the stove under a low burn. Mm-hmm. and we would eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Constant rotation.
Just constant. We just, okay.
Yeah. Do you remember the ingredients?
Grits, there's green pasoli or red pasoli. We had the red.
So tomato-based?
Yeah, tomato and
whatever the chili is,
but it was, and then it has some meat, shredded beef in
right.
it. But it's a meal that has everything. It's breakfast, lunch, dinner, every
food
possible
group.
satisfaction.
Yeah, right. Carbs, veggies, protein.
Hits all the bases.
The whole thing. Do you make it?
No, but my daughter does. She knew of my love for pasoli, and she taught herself how to make it. And we just had it for Christmas. We did the same thing. It was just right on the in my house. I have a house in upstate New York. And she made it, and it was the bowl right on top of the oven and on top of the stove, and that's what we ate all Christmas.
You know, every guest on the show furnishes a recipe. So I'm going to go to your daughter.
Notice.
You got to get me together with your daughter because I need that recipe, okay? Because it's going on it's going on the website. Mm-hmm. All right. When you guys weren't going to Chasen's and the Bistro and the Brown Derby, well, get back to that for a second. Do you remember any of the food there?
Very well, very well. There was this butterfly steak that I mentioned. There were two steaks. One was a butterfly steak, and it had so much butter in it you could rest your knife on top, and it would just slide right through.
Whoa!
And then there was the hobo steak. I forget what the total difference, but we love saying hobo.
Yeah.
So I remember that very, very well.
Were there specific dishes to the specific restaurants that were famous?
Yes.
I know Chasen's was the chili, right?
Those two I just mentioned were, that was Chasen's.
Yeah.
But the Brown Derby had they invented, I want to say, not the Waldorf salad, but they had a very elaborate salad.
Right.
Not that kids like salad. But I remember everybody would make a big deal about the salad. It had a million ingredients. And, a guy would come to your table, all dressed up, and he'd have a sterno thing, and he'd set something on fire, and he'd make an egg, and then he'd put it in the salad. It was like a real show, and tossing the thing up.
Right, some of it.
So I remember that.
Some would land and some wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Depending on where it would land. There was one other food memory, maybe not possibly as pleasant, but one that it hit me when I was looking at the book. You recall a memory from when you were 3 years old, and you were sitting with your mom, and you were pushing food around the plate, and you were asking for milk, and your mom was in extremis.
Yes, yeah, it's actually quite she was very, very pregnant, and she had a difficult birth every time, and she was very, very pregnant, and I was like in a high chair, and I'm making her get up and go down, and she was wearing a white, like, peasant dress. And I was saying, no, I want some milk, I want this. And she goes and she leans over the fridge, and I see that there's blood, and she's spotting on the back.
Aye.
And I said, Mom, you have, strawberry jam or something on your... And she sees, and she goes, quick, we got to get in the Bug. We had a Volkswagen Bug. Get in the Bug, and we just drove like crazy to the hospital. But
that's a food memory.
Yes.
Wow.
And the guilty one, too.
Yes,
I
right.
was making her get around.
Yeah. And also, it's astounding to me that you remember from 3 years old, but it was very vivid.
Very vivid.
For obvious reason.
Yeah.
Now, you had two siblings. Mm-hmm. What was it like around the dinner table, as it were,
well, it was
with them?
There was like when my parents were married, and then post when they were divorced. And my father ran a very tight house, and everything was very, very regimented. And the minute he moved out, our meals became TV trays in front to watch Gilligan's Island, and we'd all eat at different times, and there was just no discipline at all. Mm-hmm. And that's where we would have the rice and beans, just constant flow of rice. We never got sick of it.
Right, on heavy rotation.
No, on heavy rotation.
Good, right. And the conversation, was there any conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the three of us really, really got along. We really loved each other, and made each other laugh, and And, my mother was a real movie freak and would teach us about movies. And there was a series, a California network in California called $1 Million Movie.
Right.
Every week there was a new movie, and she would always tell us what the movie would be, and she'd set it up, and then we would watch it, and then they would show the same movie all week. So we would see Damn Yankees, 30 times. And we'd see Some Like It Hot, and so
Great movies.
they're all
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
They were incredibly curated when they showed them. And, my mom would be, and it was always in her bedroom. So we'd have our TV trays, and she'd be in the bed, and she'd just sort of we'd talk about movies.
Right. Now, jumping back a little bit, when your dad was still an executive, and they gave elaborate parties.
Yeah.
You remember the food from any of the parties?
They were catered affairs.
Right.
And usually, a catering company, like in those days, there would be a married couple, from Europe who once they did that social party in Hollywood, then they'd do the studio heads, and then you'd see the same people catering the same thing.
Right. And when your dad, now, what was your dad doing at the time he was producing?
He was a television executive at a place called 4-Star, which is part of CBS, and they did television series like the Barbara Stanwyck, The Big Valley. But it was started by, the 4 stars were Charles Boyer, David Niven, Robert Coote, and
Joe McCrae.
Thank you.
I know that because I did a podcast that's going to come up with his son.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
And they
Who
talked
lives
about
here?
that?
Who lives here?
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Peter.
So they were, that was really pretty classy. It was they had great taste, and these 4 movie stars started this television studio.
Right. You also have a story in the book about being fished out of the pool by a guy that we all know.
Yeah, well, there was, my parents, as I said, were very social, and they had a lunch party by our pool, and I was quite young, and Dr. No had just come out, which is James Bond's the first movie with Sean Connery, and I had seen it, and to my amazement, there's Sean Connery in our pool doing laps. And I had never been in the deep end. And I was still doggy paddle kind of style. But I wanted to show off. I wanted to show 007 what I could do. And I made my leap. I jumped in the deep end, and I sank like a stone. I remember looking up, and all the grown-ups are smoking and drinking and completely ignoring me.
Oblivious. Yeah.
Oblivious.
Yeah.
It was an upside-down Hockney painting. And then I felt a hand on my rump lift me up and put me onto the side of the pool. And he said, "A wee bit early for the deep end, sonny."
I had the good fortune of working with him twice.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he was a very cool guy.
Totally. I got to tell him that story towards the
Oh
end
yeah?
of his life.
Oh yeah. And he was a really hardworking actor.
Oh yeah.
He was very serious about his work, and also a lot of fun off. When I was on location with him once for 3 months in Spain.
Great.
Yeah, we had a great time. Anyway.
Was that, because the one time I did meet him was at Sidney Lumet's, who did Dog Day Afternoon.
Right,
I wonder if that was a connection.
Right, and that movie Brooke Adams was in.
Oh.
This movie was called Cuba.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I remember that.
That Sean was, yeah. One other thing occurred which I found really interesting was that when your parents would have parties, sometimes you were at home, but sometimes you'd get shipped off to...
A hotel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there were, there was just an attitude of parents of that generation, especially if they were very social. The kids were, sort of incidental. And they loved us, but it was like benign neglect, So if there was a particularly rowdy party, my brother, sister, and I would be in our bathrobes at night, and we'd have our homework under our arm, and a housekeeper, a nanny, would have a overnight bag, and they'd check us into a hotel. And while they partied till 5 in-the-morning.
Room service?
That was the fun part. Yeah, we weren't complaining. We loved room service.
Remember any of that?
Yeah, we would just go crazy on the room service. I don't know why food, when it's brought to your hotel room,
Yeah.
it just tastes so good.
Yeah.
I just never want to leave the room.
Yeah. I think everybody feels that way, yes? Yeah. There's something about, even if the food's bad, there's something about it's being brought to you.
It's brought to you. It's just,
I know.
It's always so expensive.
And there's also a wonderful story that you tell in the book about a joke that your father told. Not a joke, but a routine that he did with his eye.
Yeah, my dad had a, which I loved, a very dark, Irish dark sense of humor. And when I was little, he had a car, one of the first Mercedes in Hollywood, which was a very bold thing because in 1963, it wasn't that long since the war, and you're driving through Beverly Hills, and it's a mostly Jewish community, and they would see that car, the Führer's car, and go crazy. It then later became sort of the de rigueur of every agent in Hollywood would have one, but. It was a beautiful car, and I used to say when I was about 5, 6, can I drive the car? Can I drive it? And he'd say, when I cool, kid, you can drive the car. And one day he just pretends to have a heart attack. He goes, oh, Griffin, take the wheel. And I go, I got it, Dad. And I'm driving along, and it was really exciting. I was saving his life, and so the next chapter of his practical jokes was over coffee before he went to work. He's reading the paper, and then he goes, "Oh my God, no, I got it," and he reaches in and pulls out an eye like this, and I believed it was his eye. And I went in, and I touched it, and I wasn't scared. I was just fascinated. And it was a glass eye. And he goes, "Isn't that great? Doesn't it look real?" So we practiced that, and we did that at a party, where I came out, Dad, there's something wrong with my eye. And I pulled away my hand, and the glass eye fell, and then broke into a million pieces on the ground. And it was a big flop. People were just like, okay, never mind. And they went back to talking. And Billy Wilder, who I would come to, I wish I knew his movies at the time, who he was. He was just a funny Austrian. He said, you got to work on your act a little bit more, kid.
What a life to grow up that way. For celebrity to be kind of ubiquitous in your life, and to not think of it as being anything beyond these are friends of my parents.
I do wish I knew more, about what they were doing. They were just the most remarkable filmmakers and people that, then when I wanted to be in movies, I go, oh my God, I love this movie. The guy who did Shane, he was the guy in our living room.
One of my favorite movies of all time. Yeah. You guys familiar with Shane? What a great film. Yeah. Great film. The fight scene in Shane is still a textbook of how to not show too much, but just enough. Yeah. And
he did Giant,
thrilling.
Place in the Sun.
So many great movies. And some comedies too, some great comedies as well.
That's how we got started.
Yeah. So at some point, obviously, you are no longer, you're persona non grata in the house in that you're sent off to school, right?
Yeah.
Hence comes, and you can curate the story in however you wish to, but it's a story in the book about you in Fairfield.
I've been here before. I went to, never quite worked out the reason with my parents while they were around, but when I was 11, growing up in LA, I was sent to an all-boys boarding school in Massachusetts called Fay, which was a double insult. And it was very unusual for a kid that young from a place so far away to be going to school. And I had a best friend whose stepfather and mother lived in Fairfield. And when we were finally allowed to get off campus, he invited me to his house for the weekend. And we took a cab there from Massachusetts and drove there. And he was so nervous. His name was John Derby. And he was my best friend. And he was almost trembling, like, you're gonna I'm so worried about my stepfather. I'm so worried. You're gonna hate him and you're gonna hate me. I went, John, calm down. And we went to this house. It was an enormous mansion. If it was during the day, I'd drive around and look for it. A long driveway. And his mother came out. And she was a very frail, sweet woman, kind of nervous herself. And this guy's name was Henry, and he was called Hank. But he'd been married 7 times before. And we called him Henry VIII. And so we having dinner and in this big dining room, you know, a long dining table, just us, the mother and John and myself, and we just hear this banging around in the hall, and then he bursts in, and Hank is completely drunk and terrifying, and we were scared to death of him, and we're in the that night we go to the bedroom, you know, to get where we were staying. You know, John and I each had a bed, and he came in. He collected guns, like antique guns, and he came in with like a musket with a bayonet on it. And I had pants and underwear on the floor, and he picked it up with the bayonet. And he goes, "Where do you think you live in a track?" You know, and he threw the clothes in my face, and he just screamed at it, and we were like, I'd never been talked to like that. And John, when he left, John cried, and he said, I hate him so much. I want to kill him. And look, we're 11 years old. We don't know what we're doing. We actually plan to kill him. And we rehearse it. And like the next night, I'm going to stand on the bed. I'm going to put my clothes on the floor, and he's going to come in, and there was a fireplace poker in the fireplace, and he was going to take the fireplace poker and beat him on and kill him with the fireplace poker. We hear him rumbling around the hallway and leave the door open, and I get on the bed, and he actually comes in and starts screaming all right, and I go, oh my God, this is really going down. and John, like, holds the fireplace poker while Henry's just screaming at me up here, and John's behind, and he's holding the poker, and then he can't do it, and he drops it. And Henry hears the clang, and he turns around and he realizes what almost happened. And for the first time, he just stops talking. And then he just backs up out of the room. And our lives would have been very different. But that's my memory of Fairfield.
Now, you have one other story that involves, to a certain extent, food, beer, and John.
Yeah.
That was a turning point in your life.
So, we then remained such good friends. We went to yet another boys' boarding school, only this time a high school, together. And I got really into acting. That's what I really wanted to be. And John sadly got really into drugs. And our friendship just sort of went off in different directions. And I was in 10th grade, and I was about to do. I'd been rehearsing Othello. I was playing the part of Iago, and I was really in the zone. And kids and the headmaster would come and sit in the back and just watch me rehearse. And the night before the performance, John comes into my room and he's got a hash pipe. He goes, "Come on, man, we're not friends anymore. You Joe actor, and just come on, take a puff." And I go, just to shut him up, I went, "Okay," and take this big puff. And the dorm master comes in and he says, "I smell smoke. Is that somebody smoking in here?" I go, "No." And there's and I'm, it was an immediate expulsion for this. So I was sent to the headmaster's house, and he really wanted me to stay, and he wanted me to say I was not smoking hash, only John was, and I wouldn't do it, and so I was kicked out. John was kicked out, but that's what got me on the road to be an actor a little earlier than planned.
And it's interesting that you were in the midst of becoming an actor. Have you ever thought about what might have happened had that event not occurred?
Yeah, yes, I have. I think I would have had a far more sort of, traditional sort of route. I would have had I would have made a lot less mistakes. I was, whenever I did something, it was, I was always caught. But I was, kind of a little con artist, and, one of the things I did, I had a girlfriend that we were madly in love as teenagers can, and I was 17 and she was 18, and I'd just been kicked out of school, and we go to Tijuana and we get married.
17 and 18.
My parents were thrilled. And that didn't last very long either, by the way. But it was like, I know I wouldn't have gotten married in Tijuana,
right,
if I hadn't been kicked out. And I probably would have gone to college, maybe, and then started acting in my 20s,
It's always interesting to me that if you think back, and I think everybody has that sense about their life, that the things that we think were either benign events or negative in our lives are just the sum and part of who we became.
Absolutely.
And so who's to know?
Yeah.
I mean, you've had a very successful life, and also it's very interesting to me that you educated yourself.
Yes, I was not a good student. I was from first grade on, I was diagnosed. I was one of the earliest diagnoses of dyslexia, and reading was very challenging for me, and math, forget it. And so I was held back a year, which was really tough on me to be thought of as
the stigma,
stupid and all that stuff. But when I was kicked out, I was so embarrassed at my lack of education. What was once challenging, reading a book, all of that lifted. I didn't have anybody tell me I was stupid. Suddenly I just love books. I mean, to this day, I've got 1 or 2 books a week going. And I would go to the library, and when I moved to New York, go to the New York Public Library and sit in the map room and read. And everybody, since I was so young when I moved to New York, I was 18, everybody was in college and they'd all read and done all these things. And I would tell a fib and say I went to 2 years of college. And whenever they were talking about a book that I hadn't read, I'd get the book. I'd read Madame Bovary. Somebody mentioned it, and somebody mentioned Dostoevsky. So I did, I read a lot to catch up.
Mm-hmm. And also, you talk at times in the book about the kind of upbringing that you had, and that you missed out on things like the things that normal high school kids grow up doing.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that that's something that you lacked in your life?
I have cousins that I would go see who lived in Colorado. And, you know, my cousin was when I was growing up, was a great football player and for the high school team. And they'd have bonfires. And it was right out of Friday Night Lights. Not that I would know what that was at the time. And, you know, the girls were getting pinned and the boys in the
prom queen
with the leather jackets and stuff.
Yeah.
I just thought it looked fantastic. And I was in an all boys school, you know, in a coat and tie, where we had corporal punishment. You know, it was very strict Dickensian sort of school. So yeah, I really nobody I knew went to a school like what I went to. They all went to normal high schools.
Yeah. But at the same time, as we just discussed, the sum of those parts became,
absolutely.
you know, what Griffin.
That isn't my sad sob story.
No.
No, I wouldn't trade anything.
Now, this marriage when you were 17, this was this the one that was kind of helped along by your dear friend, Carrie?
Yes, she introduced us.
Okay, we're talking Carrie Fisher.
Carrie Fisher.
Okay, right. And you have a very long history of having been a very close friend of Carrie's for a long time. I knew Carrie.
Yes,
because
I know.
Carrie and I
remember.
worked together
met
a couple
you
of
with
times.
Carrie.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that we have these degrees of separation and experience them totally differently. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Carrie?
Yeah, my younger brother, he's 2 years younger than me, could not be farther from being dyslexic. He's the most intellectually curious little boy that ever lived, and just devoured books and memorized poetry and felt things so deeply. He was so romantic at heart. And one night we were sitting in front of the TV with the TV trays, and he announced, "I met a girl today. I'm in love with her, and her name is Carrie Fisher. And she's coming over here," and looked at me and go, "And don't do that thing you do." I go, "What?" He goes, don't trick her into liking you." And I saw how serious he was, you know. So when she came over, she's 15 years old, and she's so funny, and I'm just biting my tongue. I'm not trying to do a banter with her. And but everything she says just starts to make me laugh. And when my sister's name was Dominique, and she bursts into her mother's song, Dominica, Nika, Nika, Nika. And then I start singing, and then we're making up lyrics and doing farting sounds, and we were off to the races. And we just had a bond like right away. I left my brother standing on the side of the road. And I felt awful, but we didn't become boyfriend, girlfriend. We just became like, and my mother that night said, I just got my driver's license. And she said, "Will you drive Carrie home?" So I walk out to the car, and she gets into the driver's side. And I go, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Teach me to drive." And she turns on the car, drives with both feet, and starts driving up people's lawns and singing Some Enchanted Evening. And we were just crying with laughter. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Yeah.
She was a unique human being.
Yeah.
She was.
Yeah.
Daring, no holds barred. There was nothing that was sacred
Nothing.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And yet endearing and a terrific human being and a great heart.
Totally.
Great heart.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, can you talk about the fact that you were coerced into rooming with her?
Yeah, well, so I'd moved to New York, and Carrie had come to New York with her mother to be in the chorus of a musical called Irene. And they lived in a hotel, Midtown Hotel, and I had a little awful, a little tiny squalid place in the Lower East Side. And I bring my laundry and have the hotel do all my laundry.
And you're waiting tables?
And I was waiting on tables. I was at Beefsteak Charlie's, one of their finest waiters. and I would also go backstage for the show when she was doing Irene. And
And
one time-
Carrie was in the show.
Carrie was in the show
Right.
and a chorus of girls, and I would stand in the wings, and the stagehands would be throwing fake snow over her and over all the dancers and stuff. And we would play these jokes on each other. Like she had a rubber cut-off hand it was a promotional thing from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it was just a severed hand with the blood on the side. And I'd first seen it when she put it under my pillow in my apartment. I didn't know it would be there, and I saw it. And then I got it in her purse while she was singing on stage. And all the girls are supposed to take out a compact and do their face. And I put the hand in there. And this hand would just go, and we'd never mention the hand. We didn't see how the joke was going. But anyway, her mother summoned me backstage and said that Carrie wants to live in New York, but she wouldn't let her unless she had me as a roommate. So I gave up that apartment, and Debbie paid the rent for us to move into these apartments, the maids' quarters at the Des Artistes. It didn't have those big windows, but that's where we were.
The Des Artistes is an apartment building, but also has a restaurant in it, yeah?
It had a beautiful restaurant. It was very tough to get a reservation in, and I, as I said, I was working at Beefsteak Charlie's around the corner, and the maitre d' knew I lived in the building and thought I was like some lord, and always gave me a table, and always, and I would go at the bar. It had a great bar, and he was so deferential to me. And then one day he goes into Beefsteak Charlie's, and I'm waiting on him. But he appreciated a good con, and he still always made sure I got a table.
I hesitate to lead into this, but I think we would be remiss if not to at least touch on it. The tragedy of your sister's death. Mm-hmm. It brought back a memory of mine when I was hanging out with Carrie. You talk about a little bit about this in the book. The song "Every Breath You Take," the stalker song.
Yeah.
That the police. And Carrie was crazy about that song. Yeah. I don't know if you remember this.
I do remember.
She would swoon over this song, and I found it very ironic.
I got about it.
Very ironic.
Yeah.
So at the time you are in New York.
I am in New York. It's in 1982, and I'd been working rarely as an actor, even though I'd been living in New York for about 4 years. I was more a waiter, and I worked at Radio City Music Hall as a popcorn concessionaire. And my sister, who's 4 years younger than me, named Dominique, she called me one day and said, I want to be an actress. I want to do what you do. And I'm like, not able to get a job. I went, are you crazy? This job sucks. And it couldn't have been less supportive. And she got really cross. Well, from the time of that phone call, she was on a soundstage a week later, starring in a TV movie. It just happened immediately. I mean, people just looked at her, casting directors, they just said, oh, she's got it, boom. So she was very successful, on the way up. Mm-hmm. And she'd done a movie, Poltergeist. And she had a boyfriend, and this man attacked her, tried to strangle her, and she kicked him out of the house, changed the locks. And then on Halloween Eve, he killed her, he strangled her. We came back, she was in life support for some days, and this was, my brother was living in New York, my father was living in New York, and we came back, on Halloween, and,
life was never
the same, It was, and then there was a trial, and this is the second half of the book. When I was writing the book, I was having so much fun, talking about Sean Connery, the pool, and Carrie, and laughing, and I went, okay, I know where this is going, because I
Now
was
it's-
writing it chronologically.
Now it's time.
Now it's time, I got to go there. And I literally, when I was there, I just went, the next page was part 2, because it's the demarcation where your life is never the same. And a year later, there was a trial for this murderer, and it threw our family into this. We wanted to attend the trial, which at that time was very unusual, but we wanted to be there to represent our Dominique. And the way this trial just went sideways. The judge was prejudicial against. I don't know what he's got a thing about our family. He hated our district attorney. He made choice after choice the jury never saw. We're always sent out of the room when a witness was called who this killer had beaten the shit out of. I mean, just like broken jaw, eye socket. They missed seeing him lose his temper and try to attack and be wrestled to the ground by bailiffs. They had no idea how dangerous this man was. And there was a tactic that the defense used called blame the victim.
Yeah.
And they just told horrible lies about to make Dominique be a movie star, became too important to spend. It was a ridiculous fucking narrative. And they sentenced this guy. This guy only did 3.5 years in jail.
After dragging her, or her meeting her out on the lawn of her apartment because she didn't want him to come inside.
Yes.
And he strangled her.
Yes. And for that, it was called manslaughter. It wasn't even called murder. And we were kind of we were hoping for at the very least second-degree murder, but really we believed it was first-degree murder because it was so premeditated, because it takes 4 minutes to take someone's life with your hands. I mean, that gives you a lot of time to think. But if you use a gun and you impulsively, then that counts. So this jury just deemed her life worth 3.5 years for this killer. And then when they found out, the jury was appalled. And what they didn't take into account was the kind of man my father was, who had been keeping a diary of this, of what was taking place. That was published, his very first piece. His name is Griffin Dunne. And his very first piece ever published in Vanity Fair was about this trial. And it was...
This was at the urging of Tina Brown, right?
She was the one who said she happened to meet him just by chance the night before he went to California.
Right, and your father in the interim had sort of had left California, was sort of living on his own.
He'd lost all of his money, he'd lost all of his friends, and he left California. He lived in a cabin in Oregon for a while. And now he was in New York in this little tiny apartment, starting his life all over again, now sober. And by just chance, he happened to meet Tina Brown on his last night, and she was just about to be hired to run Vanity Fair. And she said, if I get this job, I want you keep a diary, I'll publish it. And he wrote this groundbreaking article that just blew people's minds.
Oh, it was extraordinary.
They had no idea. And nothing had ever been written about what a family who just assumes that the justice system is there to protect us could be betrayed by this, could be lost in the egos of these relationships between the judge and a district attorney who don't like each other, and these first impressions they have about a family. And so we were, he described that, and he became a very powerful writer, crime reporter, covered the biggest trials in America, the Menendez and O.J. and Phil Spector. And each one of these people, killed someone.
Yeah.
And he always wrote from the side of the victim. He never, when the rest of the press was calling Lana Clarkson, who Phil Spector had murdered a second-rate actress. You went, no, no, no. And he would tell you where she was from, who her parents were.
Right. The history of this person.
Yes, and he'd make her real.
Gave this person a reality.
And other people of sexual assault, and not just murder. And he became a very powerful voice for victims' rights.
And I find it quite moving. And there's the story that Griffin tells in the book is extraordinary, the second half of the book. The first half of the book is extraordinary as well, but the second half is quite moving. And the moment when your sister was being let go in the hospital and your father leaned over to her and said...
He said she was on life support for 5 days. And when we elected to take her off, last thing he said to her was, give me your talent.
Give me your talent.
Give me your talent.
Yeah. Which is...
and she did.
And she did.
Yeah.
Wow. What this, you have to read this book, folks. I don't know how we follow that, except that our time is pretty much up.
All right.
So
then.
I have a follow-up question that I always ask my guests. A little frivolous feeling at the moment, considering what we've just been through, but it's important for me and for my listeners and my viewers to take you back to when you were young, okay? And if you are out somewhere and you are having a meal or you are experiencing something in a culinary way that takes you back to when you were a little boy or when you were a child, what would that moment be?
There was a father-son baseball game at this school in before I went to the other boarding school, and they made hot dogs, like barbecued hot dogs, you know, and I don't know why I remember just eating tons of them, and it's funny. I thought of it the other day. I was late for somewhere and I didn't have time to eat, and I had to get from uptown to downtown, and I was thinking, am I just going to get a slice of pizza on the and eat it on the train? And I see a Nathan's cart, hot dog cart. I haven't had a Nathan's hot dog in so long, and that's what I ate. And I thought of the father-son baseball game just the other day.
Yeah.
And this is as good as that one was.
Yeah. And we all have those memories. We all have those memories, which is what Cooking by Heart is about.
That's it.
So, Griffin Dunne, thank you so very much for sharing all these memories. Thank you, my friend. All right. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, buddy.